Good morning, everyone. I'm Sachin Gupta, the co-founder and CEO at HackerEarth, and thank you for attending the webinar on the changing landscape of technical talent recruitment. So following is the agenda for today's webinar. We will have the an introduction about what HackerEarth does. Then we'll move on to an overview of the changing landscape and some of the trends that we've analyzed. Then we'll discuss about how one can develop a competitive edge uh, in this changing landscape, and then we'll end with a couple of case studies. So before we move on to the core agenda of the webinar, I would like to give you a quick introduction about HackerEarth. HackerEarth, we help. Our mission statement is to help businesses to identify the right people and give them the power to disrupt through innovation and continuous development. The way we do it is through two products. So the first product that we have is HackerEarth Recruit. Recruit is an assessment software. It's a technical assessment software that allows you to automatically assess technical skills using coding tests. It basically goes and sits in your recruiting workflow at the screening phase and allows you to scale up your technical screening process, hence allowing you to increase the top of the funnel, reducing the time spent on interviewing, in fact, allowing your technical panel to spend lesser time on irrelevant interviews. And more importantly, it makes the whole process unbiased and skill-driven. The other product that we have is Sprint, and Sprint is an innovation management software which allows businesses to constantly innovate and ideate by leveraging the power of crowdsourcing. So basically, Sprint allows you to create an innovation infrastructure where any employee, a customer, or a partner can actually contribute ideas. Those ideas can be converted into, there can be interactions and engagements around those ideas. And those ideas can be converted into proof of concepts, which can then eventually be adopted by business for product development. So it basically leverages crowdsourcing to drive innovation. So that was a quick introduction to HackerEarth. Now we would move on to the topic of the webinar. So I was going through a couple of articles around the recent tech IPO filings, and all of them described hiring as one of their core challenges, not only in the journey to IPO, but even continuing. They see hiring as a continuous challenge to solve. And particularly, all of them used this word in the context of technical hiring, that it is intense. There are a lot of reasons why technical hiring has been labeled as an intense challenge. There are a lot of local competition, and this is largely in context of talent hotbeds like the Silicon Valley, on the East Coast, Boston, New York. So these centers, they tend to become very intense when it comes to technical hiring. There are a bunch of reasons that lead to that, primarily being local competition for talent leads, to increase compensation. Retention becomes a challenge because of the high demand, and this ultimately drives high personal costs. So scarcity of talent, high demand, is leading to a scenario where technical hiring is becoming intense. This kind of substantiated by a survey that was done by CareerCast. They studied numerous jobs across various sectors, and the report says that out of the 10 hardest jobs to fill, 3 of them are technical jobs. So out of 10 jobs across the entire North American continent, across various segments like healthcare, banking, blue collar jobs, white collar jobs, 3 out of the 10 hardest job to fill are technical jobs, namely software programmers, security researchers, and data scientists. So this further presents or highlights the fact that technical hiring is increasingly becoming complex and difficult. Over the last few months, we have looked at some of the trends, and through different studies, we kind of narrowed down to the following 4, let's say, statistics. So there's been a marked decrease in active job seeking over the last 1 decade. And this is quite evident from the decreasing popularity of various job boards and increasing popularity of professional networks and social networks when it comes to job seeking behavior. So this is a survey from Stack Overflow, which says, a 2016 survey, which says that only 15% of developers are actively looking for new jobs. But what's most interesting is that almost 80%, the same survey states that about 80% of the same developers are actually interested for a better opportunity. What that means is, though talent is out there, though it is interested in more exciting opportunities, they're not actively seeking these jobs. The second trend that has been noticed, that has been observed, is that about 64% of the developers want new and creative work. So when they decide to change a job, when they're looking for a better opportunity, the kind of work that they end up doing, the kind of creative freedom that they get, is a deciding factor in the job that they choose. So obviously compensation is one of the most is a high motivating factor, but then the ability to do what they love is equally important. Up till now, the trend in the industry had been that developers would develop affiliations towards technologies. So there would be certain developers who would look at a certain skill set and would want to build their career. For example, a mobile developer would obviously look for mobile jobs, but somebody who's working on the back end and is proficient in Python may choose to work in companies that provide a better peer group when it comes to Python, and the backend is infrastructure is built on Python. Now, the developers are not only choosing the technical domains in which they want to operate, in which they want to work, but they're also choosing the business domains. For example, developers are increasingly saying that I want to work in the field of artificial intelligence that impacts, let's say, banking, or something that impacts healthcare. So they're not only choosing technical domains, but they're also choosing business domains. The third is kind of fairly familiar with all of us today, is the millennial mindset. The nature of workforce is very different because of the millennial mindset. And one of the key factors in that is that about 70%, three quarters of the developers who were part of this survey, they wanted an option to work from home. So for the companies who are in the hotbed of talent like Silicon Valley or the East Coast in New York or Boston, it may be fairly common for a few startups to have an option to work from home, but it's still not a fairly common practice when it comes to larger organizations. Now, kindly note the use of the word option. So it's not like developers want to work from home all the time. It's just that they want that freedom. They want the freedom to be able to work from home when they want to. And this kind of extends to all the other things that excite or entice the millennial mindset. It's not really that they want to do it all the time. It's just that they want to have that option. They want to have that sense of freedom that if I want to do this, I do have the option. And lastly, the survey evaluated a lot of developers and asked them, once they were out on the road looking for a new job, what was the most alluring factor for them beyond compensation. And it appears that increasingly people are rating culture as one of the key deciding factors for them to choose a job from one over the other. So they want to know what is the culture of the company, what does the company care about. It's not just about the technologies that the business operates in, it's not just the scale of problems that the business is solving, but it is also about why the business is doing what it does. This has a direct impact. All of these factors have a very direct impact on one fundamental instrument in the recruiting workflow, and that is the job description. So when developers want to do what they love, when they value culture, all of these things, what is the culture of the company, what is the work all about, all of that has to be reflected, not just in the job description, but on any other touch points where a potential job seeker can get to interact with the business or with the company for a job opportunity. So talking about these things, being cognizant of these trends will help you to understand how to look at technical hiring landscape. So based on what just adding to that, if we look at some of the other challenges that we face out, that businesses are facing, that one faces in technical hiring, is the concept of big company golden handcuffs. So what's happened is with big companies like Google's and Facebook's, which are today not just restricted to their core expertise, but are actually going into all kinds of businesses. So it's becoming increasingly hard to distinguish Google from. It will become very hard to distinguish Google from a software company to say a banking company or to a home automation company. All of these businesses are now increasingly coming under a single umbrella of Google and Facebook. So what it does they're not only able to offer high salaries to the talent, but they're also able to offer them very interesting work. So if somebody ends up working, in ending up in one of the organizations like these, it's very hard for them to move out. And it's been often discussed that it's often said that there's not really a shortage of candidates in technical roles, and it's basically a hype. But the fact is the problem is real. The supply doesn't meet the demand, and this problem is particularly accentuated in the hotbeds of talent, because the amount of jobs that are being created at the rate at which the jobs are being created are not supplemented by the inflow of candidates from other parts of the country. So there is a shortage of demand, at least in the centers where the jobs are, in the localities where the jobs are. This translates into a trend where businesses will now have to increasingly go outside of their local hiring centers and look at other options at other geographies or other states within the country to attract talent. So it is going to become harder to continue hiring talent in Silicon Valley that belongs to Silicon Valley, because there are only so many people that can move to Silicon Valley before for you to be able to hire them. You will have to go out of these hotbeds and look at other locations to attract talent. So based on various studies and what we have learned from by working with some of our customers and by looking at the market, the following three things are something that can provide you a competitive edge when you are competing in this war for talent. They are employer branding, automation, and candidate experience. So employer branding kind of goes back and correlates to the two things that I discussed in the preceding slides. The first is that developers want to do that they love, and the second is they value culture over other things when they're choosing the next employer. So employer branding is very different from company branding marketing. It's not talking about the top line of the business. It's not talking about how many offices the company has, but it is talking about the work that the person, your potential candidate or employee, is going to do once they're in the company. It's talking about what is the culture of the company, how do they look at work, how do people spend their daily lives at the company. Articulating the company mission, what does the company do and why they do is more important. And investing in employer brand is going to be one of the most long-term investments that one can do in when tackling technical hiring. And of course, automation is not only going to help you increase the speed of screening candidates or hiring candidates, but it'll also help you to minimize the human bias. The social media today, and there's a lot of talk around the hiring bias, the bias that exists in the recruiting process for across all the roles, the bias in gender, the bias in caste, the various kind of biases that exist in the society, and we can all try and deny it, but the problem is real. The problem has always been there, and it's just that the impact of the problem is actually increasingly becoming more severe as we go. So there is the need to leverage automation to minimize human bias, and of course to automate all the steps, any step that's possible. And of course, superior candidate experience. So the journey of a candidate, or let's say the journey of your employee, the potential employee, begins when the potential employee is still a candidate. So what they feel during their interviewing and recruiting process is critical. It is not only critical from the perspective of the person who gets hired, but it's in fact even more critical from the perspective of the person who doesn't end up getting hired, because these are the folks who go out there, talk to their friends, and tell them about this awesome company at which they interviewed but didn't get through. So these people become your word of mouth, and they become source of your next hire, potentially the source of your next hire. So providing a superior candidate experience is actually a no-brainer. So let's look at these 3 points in more detail. We'll examine what it is all about, and what are some techniques that you could use in automation, candidate experience, and employer branding to help you in improving your technical recruitment process. Let's start with automation. So ideally, the goal of the automation process, of any automation that you introduce into your recruiting process, should be to increase that funnel on the top. Given the high demand, given the restricted supply, given the pressures to fill positions as fast as possible, the only sustainable way of meeting your hiring requirements is to increase the top of the funnel as much as possible. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that you need to try each and every source that is at your disposal. As a recruiter today, you cannot pick and choose and say, hey, I will only look at source A, B, and C because they have good conversion rates. You cannot afford to look at just source A, B, and C because you don't know that D, E, and F they may give you their conversion rates, maybe say 1 in 50 or 1 in 40, but it is still that one hire that can potentially come out of that source. And because the pressure on closing positions is so high today, you can't afford to miss that out. So you need to figure out a way by which you can increase the top of the funnel and look at all possible sources. That of course comes with its own problem, that if the if the conversion rates are low, how do I ensure that I don't end up wasting my time in low performing sources? So that's where an automation process should come in. An automation process should allow you to look at non-conventional or poor performing sources as well, but without reducing the time that you spend in going through those candidates. So the second point is that automation should also improve the quality of hiring. Of course, it should reduce the time and effort spent on screening these applicants, and this should not happen only in the low performing sources, but across the board. Whenever you introduce an automation process, it should reduce the overall time that you as a recruiter spend in screening the applicants, and potentially the time that your interviewing panel is going to spend on interviewing that person. So if there's any system or any tool that can reduce the number of interviews, or it can reduce the amount of time you spend going through the resume, then it's something that you should be looking at. And again, very importantly, an automation process should be able to reduce the human bias in the whole recruitment process. So there's a term called blind hiring, where some advocates of that have gone to an extreme level, advocating that candidates should be interviewed blindfolded, and they should even the voice of the candidate should be masked or made neutral, so that one cannot, and of course that's not possible. That's really not possible for you to do interviews like that. It's just going to slow down the entire process of interviewing, and it'll be extremely hard for interviewers to adapt to a process like this. But the point that it tries to make is that no matter how hard we try, human biases exist. So any system, any process, or any tool that can reduce the human bias is going to work in your advantage. And there is an increasing trend that, and this is particularly in the context of technical hiring, that the focus is on skill-based hiring. So traditionally, if you look at the recruiting process, typically as a recruiter, you are always going to look for signals. You're going to look for signals of quality. So one example of a signal could be the school that a candidate went to. If somebody's gone to an Ivy League school, the probability of the candidate being better than a non-Ivy League candidate has been historically considered to be better. But what's changing in this world of technology, that access to technical education or access to programming skills is completely democratized. There could be a kid sitting in some tier 3 city who hasn't gone to an Ivy League college or school, but can still beat some of the sharpest minds in an Ivy League school. And that's because it is becoming increasingly easy for anyone to get access to good quality technical education through a computer, through a laptop and an internet connection. All you need is that, and there are tons and tons of sources out there where you can go and learn how to program. So the focus is now shifting slowly away from the traditional signals, which have been the pedigree, it has been the kind of companies one has worked at, to moving on to skill-based hiring, where ideally an employer should not really care about where the person studied, what the person has done in the past, but they should just look at the skills that the person has, and then should be able to make an objective hiring decision based on the skills that the person demonstrates. An ideal automation process should allow you to do that. Moving on to the second point, which is candidate experience. So what could be some salient features or aspects of candidate experience, particularly in the context of technical recruiting? First, the candidate interview experience should actually be a reflection of the company culture. It should tell the candidate that this is how, so the way they are interviewed should reflect the way they would end up working in the company culture, in the company. It should talk about the problems that the company cares about. The interview should be as real, as close as possible to the actual work that the company does. It is the first experience that the person gets about your company, and it better be a good experience. Particularly in context of technical hiring, remote screening can actually help you with providing a very good experience to the candidates. We all know that it's cumbersome to come to the office, spend 6 hours going through multiple rounds of interviews, and then being rejected. If one can use remote screening or remote interviewing processes to eliminate those cases which are going to be rejected. So if you can improve the quality of your recruiting funnel through using remote screening or remote interviewing tools, it is good not only for you because you have lesser volume to deal with, but it also provides a good experience to the prospective employees or the candidates who are in the process, because they don't need to carve out a day from the schedule and then travel all the way and give the interviews. They can actually just do a remote screen, and based on how they perform, then one can take a more informed decision. An ideal interviewing process should allow the candidates to truly showcase their skills. And this kind of stems from the aspect of biases that exist within an interviewing process. We all tend to have our own quirks and our own preferences. The worst thing that we end up doing is we start comparing every candidate to ourselves, and we put them through the same filters or the same processes that we think we can solve well. But that's not really true. There are multiple ways in which a person can respond to a certain job. Let me rephrase. There are multiple ways in which a person can respond well to a certain job. There's no fixed way of doing a particular thing. So this what tends to happen in a biased interviewing process. But ideally, your interviewing process should be such that allows the candidates to showcase their skills in a manner which makes them comfortable. Interviewing can actually be a daunting experience. So anything that allows the candidate to feel free and to be able to demonstrate their skills in their own comfortable surroundings would help them, would provide a better experience to them. And and other than that, if one can simulate the on-job experience in the interviewing process, that's great, because now you'll be able to measure the candidate exactly on the skills that you want them on the job. And two last pieces of advice when you're looking at candidate experience: move fast and be realistic. A thing that I think all of us would agree that nobody wants to put in a resume and then not know for 3 weeks as to what's happening to their application. A good candidate experience ensures that you move fast, you give feedback. So even if the candidate is rejected, it's always better to let the candidate know sooner rather than later and give them a good explanation as to why they were rejected. And one has to be realistic. So this kind of stems, on this point, I want to discuss briefly about the job descriptions. So we also looked at, and that's not part of this webinar, but we've also studied a lot of job descriptions, and almost all of those job descriptions are far away from reality. We have a habit of stuffing too many requirements into one single piece of job description. Whether it relates to the actual work skills required is debatable. So the more realistic you are today for your requirements when it comes to recruiting, the more likely you're to get good candidates. So on this front, I want to actually talk about two case studies, and I want to talk about how one can leverage an assessment product to provide both superior candidate experience and to introduce automation in their process. So so what I want to talk about in this case study about Amazon is how they used a technical screening product to increase the top of the funnel while still maintaining the quality of the candidates that were going through the funnel. So what the assessment process allowed them to do was to simulate a real world, or let's say simulate an on-job assignment for the candidate when they were coming in for the interview, before they came in for the interview in the screening process. And this on-job assignment allowed them to evaluate the candidates objectively, because it's an automated tool, there is no human intervention here, allowed them to evaluate the candidates in an unbiased manner for the skill sets that they were required to have on the job. And because this whole process is automated, they were able to do this sophisticated screening across thousands of candidates and not, say, tens of them. So the assessment process that they've used, which is they've worked with us for this, allows them to give candidates coding tests, and these coding tests, as I said, are as close to the real world problem that the potential employee could be working on. And what they were able to do, that they were able to screen more than 40,000 candidates across 300 plus hiring drives, and they made about, I think they made about 200 to 300 hires, and the entire process of the screening was automated, and they were able to do this across both their campus as well as lateral hiring. And the most interesting aspect about this entire screening process, that this process was completely owned, independently owned by the recruiting team. There was little or zero involvement of the technical team in screening and interviewing for the first level for these candidates. Another example is that of Odessa. So Odessa is another one of our customers, and they were doing campus hiring using the archaic way of pen and paper. So there was not only too much effort that was involved, but there was also a lot of inaccurate screening that was taking place. So what happens is, if you ask a candidate, a programmer, to write code on a piece of paper or to write code on a whiteboard, that's like asking an artist to make a painting but not giving them enough colors to operate with. So because it's extremely hard for a programmer to actually write good quality code out of their coding environments, out of their development environments. We are used to using autocomplete. We are used to looking up references from the web. We don't really bother too much about the syntax, but it's about having the right environment in which one can code. Asking them to do it on pen and paper it's very detrimental. It does two things. One, it increases the probability of the candidate not performing well because this environment is alien to them. And secondly, it also introduces more increased biases in the screening process, because imagine a hiring manager who has to now go through 40 different answer sheets, each having 50 lines of code written in it. Reading through that much amount of code can actually result in a lot of bias while screening. So we worked with Odessa and helped them to, so it is 10,000 candidates screened. So they were able to screen about 10,000 candidates. This was largely used for their university hiring. They were able to hire from 40 campuses in a short duration of 6 months. And now they have scaled up their entire hiring process using the automated screening tool. Moving on to the next part. So up till now, I've covered about what is the impact of automation on a technical recruiting process, automation and superior candidate experience, and how you can use a good assessment software to improve a candidate experience on both the fronts. Moving on to the next part, which is around employer branding. So this is from a study by LinkedIn, a report by LinkedIn. It says that 80% of the talent leaders agree that employer brand has significant impact on their ability to hire. So 80%, 4/5 of the talent leaders agree that this is something impactful. But what's surprising is that only 8% of the budgets go towards employer branding. So people believe that it is of something, it's something of value, They find it of use, but they're not really investing in it. They're not able to invest in it. And there are various reasons. The biggest reason for that is that employer branding. So whenever branding comes in, branding is always a long-term game. A long-term game. It's never short-term. Employer branding is not going to help you hire your help you close your positions for this month or this next month, but it is going to ensure that you have a smooth process, you have a smooth inflow of candidates, inbound candidates coming in for next year. So it is a long run process. And what happens is when budgets are being allocated, when talent leaders are discussing about investing in various tools and various processes, the things which are long term tend to take a back seat. But this is a, it's a fallacious vicious circle, because this happens every year. I don't allocate budget for employer branding this year because I am not confident that it's going to help me in this year hiring, and I do the same the next year and the next year. So something like this, even though people understand there's value, it never gets invested into. So this is something that businesses, more proactive businesses, are doing a great job of investing in employer branding, and others are lagging behind. What's even more interesting is that technical recruiting requires even more focused employer branding efforts. And this again goes back to some of the statistics that I shared with you in the beginning, that the technical talent today is far more informed. They want to have choice, they want to decide where they want to work, they want to solve interesting problems. So it's a much more informed user that we are talking to. It's a much more independent user. It's a user who goes online, who researches heavily, who compares, who talks to their friends, and then they decide which job they should go into. And in this case, when the user is so informed, you have to be visible, you have to be present at the right places at the right time to be able to create a relationship with that user. So technical recruiting requires a lot more effort. Some of the things that you can do for building a technical employer brand is extensively talk about your engineering and technology. So it's, as I said in the beginning, it's not about the top line of the business, it's not about how profitable you are, but it's about talking the problems that you're solving today. It's about the kind of projects that you're tackling. So asking your engineering leaders to blog about some of the hardest problems that they've solved. You would have seen this, companies like Uber, Google, Facebook, they do a brilliant job of talking about the scale or the complexity of problems that they're solving every day. It is somewhere attracting passive job seekers to get to know about these companies, where they come to see, hey, this is cool work that's being done here, I also want to do that. So you need to talk about it at as many places as possible, on your company blog, on your through your company website, through social media, or any medium through which a potential employee can look at it. For instance, even your job description can have a link to the engineering blog. So when you, or not the job description, but at least where the candidates can apply. When you tell them about the company, share the links of the engineering blog. And if you don't have an engineering blog, set up an engineering blog as soon as possible. This is again, a link to the first point. You need to make your leaders speak. Your engineering team has to be part of developer events. They need to go to hackathons, they need to attend conferences, tech talks. You can host tech talks in your offices. One neat little trick to attract local talent in specific niche communities is to offer your space for hosting meetups. And it's very simple. You can just go to meetups.com, choose the domain or the technology in which you're interested, invite that group to come and host a tech talk or a meetup at your place. And you can also ask them if one of your engineers can be part of that event. And that becomes a way for you to not only create an employer brand, but also create a short-term pipeline of candidates. The other thing that you could do is allow developers to engage even before they join the company. So this could be, if you have offered a candidate, or let's say even if you've not offered a candidate, these are potential, let's say prospective candidates, you could host a hackathon at your premises, or you could, as I said, you could host your own meetup or your own tech talk and invite them and come and see the company culture, allow them to engage with your teams, invite some of your own technical teams to be part of that event so that they can go around, talk to them, and kind of share, exchange notes. This helps in creating a brand within that audience. If we look at university recruiting, the branding becomes even more critical, because nobody is as finicky, or let's say as choosy when it comes to fresh talent. they are probably the most choosy lot out of all potential candidates that one can recruit. So creating a lasting employer brand is even more critical when we look at university recruiting. Uh, just to give you some examples, we worked with HP. HP conducts a series of hackathon which happen twice in a year, and they do it every year. So they've kind of made it a brand, which is called Thinkathon, and it is only limited at universities. So what HP has been able to do through these online hackathons is that they were able to gather about 6,000 plus registrations, about 2,000 odd participants, and they were participants from different universities across the country. And what was most interesting about this particular engagement was HP had broken down the entire challenge into 4 segments that are related to their business units. So they were actually pitching out relevant business problem to the candidates and saying, hey, why don't you take a jab at this problem? So this does 2 things. A, it allows you to create a channel of communication with prospective candidates, and B, it gives them a glimpse of what the business is all about. It tells them the kind of problems that the company is solving today, the kind of challenges that they're seeing. So even before they even think about working at HP, they already know that these are things that HP does, and they are somewhere connected to you because they participated in the hackathon that you hosted for them. What HP even did in this, they went a step ahead and they invited the top 50 participants of this activity to come over to their office, and then they made their leaders talk to these guys and engage with them. Uh, we've spoken about this. We read about this at various forums that diversity hiring is one of the hardest things to solve for. And what one needs to do is really to go to the source. You need to capture the attention of your diversity audience right at the source, because just because the supply is so limited, you really need to maximize your probability or maximize your chances, and hence you need to look at as large sources as possible. And what's best than going to the root point, and that's what Pitney Bowes did. They did an all-girl campus hackathon to attract female developers, and the objective was not to hire. The objective was only to create an engagement with women programmers in colleges. This allowed them to create a brand early, and which would obviously help them in the subsequent hiring process. And again, they did something similar to HP. They invited the top, I think, 10 girls to their campus, had an engagement session with them for a day, introduced them to a bunch of leaders, and they created a neat case study out of it, a video case study. And imagine now these girls would have gone back, they would have spoken with their friends, not only in their own university, but other places as well, and would have spoken about the experience that they had at Pitney Bowes. So from somebody who probably did not know about Pitney Bowes, they from that person they changed that person into somebody who's now become a proponent for the company, who goes and talks about them. So you're not only creating a pipeline for your immediate hiring, but you're also creating a viral word of mouth. Your your employer branding efforts may not only be restricted to say certain demographics or locations. It could also be based on technologies. So this is what Society General did. Society General is one of the leading French banks, and they're actively increasing their efforts in the space of data science. So they said, instead of doing anything which is for a particular geography or a particular city or for a particular kind of audience, let's look at folks, let's engage with people who are passionate about data science. So they did an data science hackathon. They had about 3,000 plus registrations, about 2,000 participants, and it was a completely technology focused developer outreach. So they were instantly able to engage with a very tight community which is of that of data science, machine learning, and they were not only able to establish a channel of communication with them through this hackathon. About 100 people ended up visiting Society General in their office to solve these machine learning data science problems. Interestingly, they were also able to hire. So when these developers were at their office, when they were solving this problem, they had very quietly put in a few recruiters to go and talk to the candidates, understand where they stand in their in their journey of looking for a potential new opportunity. They had a couple of discussions, asked these candidates if they're interested in working, and they were able to close some of the positions there. Why they were able to do this is because by doing a hackathon like this, Society General put across a very clear message telling the data science community that, hey, first, we care about data science. We want to solve problems in the field of data science. And second, they demonstrated that they have actual problems that people can come and solve. So what Society General had done was that they had opened up their data sets, of course, or they had opened up their transaction data sets. Of course, all of it was anonymized, and they invited people to do interesting analysis on top of it, like fraud detection and other things. And the quality of the data was fairly impressive. So this, kind of told to the that this sent a signal to the participants that yes, this is an interesting challenge where I can actually solve a real world problem. So these are some of the activities, these are some of the things that you can do to build an employer brand. With this, we come towards the end of the webinar today. I would like to end with this note that the nature of workforce is changing. They are far more informed, and they are making their decisions with greater independence than before. And this change in workforce requires a change in the recruiting process. Investing in automation, candidate experience, and employer branding will give you a long-term competitive edge. So that's for the webinar today.